Good afternoon and welcome to the ALCTS virtual pre-conference, Planning for the Evolving Role of Metadata Services. This has been a three-part virtual pre-conference, with the first two parts held earlier in the week. I'm Sandy Thompson, your host for today's presentation, Session 3, Techniques and Technologies for Developing Local Controlled Vocabularies. Our first presenter today is Allison J. Odell. Allison works as the metadata librarian at the University of Florida, with previous positions in metadata services for special collections at the University of Miami, the Free Library of Philadelphia, the Barnes Foundation, and Goucher College. She serves on the editorial teams of the RBMS Controlled Vocabularies and the RLIS Artists Books Thesaurus. She frequently writes, speaks, and thinks about library controlled vocabularies in a linked data environment. Our second presenter is Dan Tamdo. Dan is the Metadata Services Manager at the George Washington University Libraries, where she manages cataloging activities, including description and analysis of special collections material, and contributes to projects in areas such as authority control and experimentation with the Bibliographic Framework Initiative, or BibFrame. A few things to keep in mind for today's presentation. Today's webinar does not have interactive chat capabilities. If you wish to comment on today's presentation using Twitter, you may use the hashtag you see on the screen. We will not be monitoring the Twitter feed, however. If you have questions for the presenters, please type them into the question box on your screen. The questions will be collated by myself and event co-coordinator Liz Woolcott. The speakers will answer them as time permits at the end of her presentation. Questions which remain unanswered while we are on the air will be answered offline, and the responses will be sent to all attendees. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive an email with links to the recording, the presentation slides, and an evaluation within 2 days. Please take time to fill out the evaluation form, since it will be used by the committee to plan future events. And now I'll hand it over to Allison for our first presentation.
Okay, thank you, Sandy. So I want to start off by addressing my fellow catalogers and archivists out there, because probably at some point, all of you have wanted to index a subject term or a name that wasn't available in one of the big controlled vocabularies, like LCSH. If you're working with special collections, which are by their very definition specialized, this problem is amplified. So what do? We end up developing local vocabularies. We find ways to make our own metadata consistent, and we can get pretty creative. I've seen every solution from post-it notes to text files to spreadsheets and databases to try and keep our own index terms consistent. Often, basically by the seat of our pants, we're building controlled vocabularies through these roundabout ways that are specific to our institution and our collections. But oftentimes the work just stops there. We keep our local vocabularies local. We don't make them available for reuse by other projects and collections, and that's just a darn shame. So at my institution, we were using a hodgepodge of the notes and web tools kind of approaches to manage local index terms. The end result was that we were duplicating work, and our vocabularies were not consistent across our own collections and projects. Moreover, our vocabularies were not made available to other institutions, and in some cases, they weren't even made available to researchers for browsing. So this all needed fixing. And today, I'm going to talk about the solution that I came up with, which is to centrally manage our local vocabularies with a content management system for thesauri called Teamatrace. It's web-based, which meant that everyone, whether they're in cataloging, special collections, general collections, archives, branch libraries, at home in their pajamas, anyone, anywhere can access the tool. So everyone can collaboratively contribute to documenting and building local vocabularies in one easy-to-access spot. So let's start with a story. Once upon a time, in a land far, far away, at the very bottom of Florida, My awesome colleague Steve Hirsch processed and described the Firefly zine collection. And this collection is, you guessed it, full of themes, which are self-published, handmade, usually Xerox serials, often focused on countercultural and progressive topics. A lot of the subjects in zines are not reflected in LCSH. So Steve did the natural thing. He started assembling his own controlled vocabulary to index the Firefly zine collection. He kept a flat list of terms in an Excel spreadsheet. With Steve's solution, local subject data was kept consistent, and the spreadsheet could be shared upon request. The thing was that you had to know to ask for it. So generally speaking, this controlled vocabulary was kept unintentionally secret from other projects and from researchers. So in comes Teamatrace to save the day. The zine subject thesaurus was our pilot project for playing around with using this managed, centralized local vocabulary. I'll use this project as an example throughout the presentation. And you'll get to see lots of pictures of zines. So while I'm at it, let me just plug. If you're interested in these images or these collections, definitely check out the University of Miami Special Collections. End plug. Okay. Why are local vocabularies important? Because special collections are special. They focus on specialized topics. Their users focus on specialized aspects. They are specific to our organizations and to our geographic areas. Special collections may feature topics, people, and genres that nobody else has resources on. Special collections are unique, and it's important that we provide access to the unique features and unique foci of our special collections. So we need local thesauri. Local thesauri let folks access the unique features and unique foci of special collections. Keep that in mind. Now, we can do this by the seat of our pants, taking the post-it note approach, and only using consistent character strings to control local terms. Or we can do this in a managed, shared, and shareable way. If we take our local vocabularies off of those post-it notes and out of those little spreadsheets and out of our individual databases, and we treat them like proper thesauri, we can enable so much potential. We can take that and we can build browsing and searching platforms. We can identify and create links between resources, between our resources and those of other institutions. We can collaborate with colleagues to do all of this work. Okay, let's go back to maybe Library School 101. How do we build thesauri? Why add certain concepts and why establish certain relationships? There are three areas that warrant thesauri production. One, literary warrant. Maybe a certain topic is cropping up in the literature of a field. Maybe a certain place or name appears in your collections. Two, user warrant. Maybe your users are especially interested in a certain area and you want to call that out. Or three, organizational warrant. Maybe your organization has its own particular focus or interest and you want to bring that out in your metadata. What are our goals when building thesauri? Well, we want to give semantic and taxonomic meaning to our data. And we do this by defining concepts, by establishing synonyms, differentiating between homographs, by setting up definitions, and by establishing relationships between concepts. Our overall goal is to improve discovery. With controlled vocabularies, we can offer users indexes to browse, collocating links or facets, improve search results, data visualizations, and data analysis tools. Okay, and Library School 101. Now let's talk about the cool stuff. There are a lot of tools out there to help you build thesauri. These are just a few of them. The one that we chose is called Teamatrace because it's free, open source, easy to use, and easy to install. Literally took about 10 minutes. With a simple editing interface, you can add terms, establish relationships and notes, add links to web resources, and even add images. You can do lots of stuff with this editorial interface. You can add terms. You can add multiple terms at once. You can add notes and then define what kind of note you want, whether that's a scope note or a bibliographic note or what have you. You can set up private notes, do lots of cool stuff. You can even add pictures. Maybe you want to illustrate a concept. And then you can build relationships. You can subordinate existing terms. You can add broader terms, related terms, whatever, and the system just automatically creates the inverse. It's really cool. Once you've got all of your stuff in the thesaurus, you can kind of look through what's there two ways. You can either browse through a tree hierarchy, and you'll see kind of the top level terms on the front page, and then drill down, and you've got an alphabetical thing that helps you get looking around, or you can search. And it does fuzzy matching. It's really great search, actually. It's really, really, really simple to use Tematrace. That's one thing that I want you to take away from this. The data is made available in multiple formats, which means you've got a lot of options for using, publishing, ingesting, and repurposing your thesaurus. One format to notice here is the Simple Knowledge Organization System. This is a standard for representing knowledge organization systems like thesauri on the semantic web using RDF. It's basically a schema for encoding thesauri. You can think of it that way. It includes the principles of thesaurus design that you're familiar with in libraries: broader terms, narrow terms, CEC also references, preferred label, non-preferred label, all that stuff that you learned in library school. But it adds in some new stuff that works on the web, such as matching concepts in other vocabularies, and a bunch of new documentary notes that help you contextualize your concepts. Okay, let's talk about building relationships, and back to Library School 101. Relationships do a couple of things. Preferred and non-preferred terms say which lexical label you'd prefer to have display. Related terms are just like see also references. They say this concept has some connection to that concept, but maybe there's no implicit hierarchy between the two. Broader terms and narrow terms set up a hierarchy, right? And all of these relationships you can add using Tematrace, just magic pants. Okay, so what happens here is that these relationship types help you build a taxonomy out of your metadata. They help you represent the foci and the features of your collections and say what's going on in the discourse of your fields or your collections. What's going on a taxonomic level, you know, what people are focusing on. You can bring all of that out, right? And then the next step is to represent how your thesaurus relates to other vocabularies. So maybe I would set up a relationship that says my concept avocado is the same as this other vocabulary's concept alligator pear. Or maybe my concept avocado is narrower than this other concept fruit, right? So why is it important to establish relationships between vocabularies? This is how we let our data be heterogeneous and interoperable at the same time. This is how we extend existing controlled vocabularies, such as LCSH, locally. With our zine collections, external relationships let us build a thesaurus of concepts specific to our zines, and then map how these fit in with LCSH and other vocabularies. Creating links between resources is how we build 5-star linked open data. This is how we build the semantic web. Back to Library School 101. If everyone remembers the 5-star system, 1 star, make your stuff available on the web. 2 stars, make it available as structured data. 3 stars, use non-proprietary formats. 4 stars, use URIs to denote things so people can point at your stuff. And 5 stars, link your data to other data to provide context. So using Tematrace, we were able to put our local vocabulary on the web as a structured, RDF-friendly data with URIs for each concept, and then link our vocabulary to other vocabularies. So magic! We achieved streamlined workflow and linked open data. Really, really cool. It sounds great, right? The system makes the technical aspects super, super easy, but it doesn't fix the human elements. Taxonomies are tricky. They're tricky enough when you're working with a closed system, building relationships within a thesaurus, but it's a whole new can of crazy when you start building external relationships. You don't necessarily know how another domain uses a concept or what they meant by a certain lexical label. Our team had many a kind of moment trying to figure out how to describe a relationship between our concept and somebody else's concept. So let's look at the example body modification. Wikipedia has an entry for it, and LCSH has body marking, which is similar, right? The scope in LCSH gives examples of branding, cutting, tattooing, and piercing, but the Wikipedia definition on the screen is way more inclusive. So we had to discuss, how does our concept relate to these other concepts? When we're trying to define and contextualize our concepts with relation to external vocabularies, we have some decisions to make. For guidance, we can just turn to our warrant. How are the authors and publishers in our domain using this concept? How is it defined in the discourse? How are our users using this concept? What do they mean when they search for it? And how are we using this concept in-house? How can we support our own organizational and research needs? We learned a really big lesson from this project. Since the subject term list for the collection had been put together a few years back, we couldn't exactly remember how we'd applied our terms. So if only we'd put this thesaurus together sooner, written scope notes, looked at other vocabularies, managed all of those relationships at the outset. Well, now we can, because now we have a tool for doing that. And now that we've got our local thesauri put together, we can start doing cool stuff. What are some ideas? Well, repurpose. We can consistently and efficiently use the same vocabularies for other collections and projects. Another idea that came up, we're a NACO member, maybe you're a SACO member. The thesaurus management system could create a space for developing a queue where team members collaboratively collect information about those persons, organizations, and topics that you want to contribute. Maybe your institution creates EAC-CPF records. So a system like this could be used to gather and share contextual information across the library and the archives, and then export that and do whatever with it. So on the one hand, the management tool is a great way to keep things organized in the back of the house. And on the other hand, it's a great way to develop front-end interfaces. We can transform our thesaurus into indexes, guides, visualizations, and other tools to help users browse and search through collections. When we do this, we give our local topics, our local foci, local genres, and local names a home on the web. And in linked data-friendly formats, we give our special stuff a home on the semantic web. You might publish your thesaurus as linked to open data or contribute to the open metadata registry or whatever, just get it out there. Because a lot of opportunities open up once you've got a shared and shareable way to manage local vocabularies. So what I want you to take away from this presentation, number one, how simple it is to use a content management system for thesauri. And there are a bunch out there, explore them. Number two, how a centralized system can totally revolutionize and streamline your workflows. It's so much better than the random assortment of Post-it notes and text files and disconnected databases that we were using and probably many of you are using right now. Number three, how much potential there is for building fun and awesome applications on top of a structured thesaurus. And number four, how much greater that potential is if you output your thesaurus as linked open data, which you can do with most of the management tools on the market now. So we're going to open it up for questions. You can ask questions, but I'd also just love to hear your ideas for how you might use a tool like this. On the screen, I've included my contact information and that of my collaborators on the zine subject thesaurus. They're super nerdy too, and they would love to hear from you. Thank you, guys.
All right, thanks so much, Allison. So we'll take questions now, or people can share their thoughts as well. So Allison, Jasmine has written in and asks, what was the implementation strategy for rolling out the tool for the water library staff to use?
Well, if I'm understanding the question. So I started off just by putting together an instance up on just a local server and kind of figured out how simple it was to install it, what the snags would be, and figure out all the access and security issues, and then met with our IT guys to talk through that and set it up. And then one of the things that the pilot project was intended to do was to understand the workflow ramifications. With Trace, you can set up accounts with different levels of permissions for people to go in and have editing access. Anyone can view it, and then certain people can edit, right? So we were kind of trying to figure out whether it would be best if certain people were editors, or whether it would be best if we just opened it up for maybe all cataloging staff or all library staff to contribute, and whether that would get confusing. And what we found is that we weren't really stepping on each other's toes. It's a great space for kind of drafting out stuff, because you can just add in a bunch of notes and not make stuff public. You can keep it private until you're ready to flip a switch, and just share and build and discuss on the web. So I hope that answers your question. That was our process.
Great, thanks so much. Leah has written in and is asking, how long did it take you to implement, and how many terms do you have?
So in that project, about 200 terms. So what we did there was they already exist, so to get them into the system is literally just like copy and paste, because you can put in a bunch of terms at once just with a line break in between them, and then it creates separate entries for each of them. So what we did for this was dump them all in, and then we broke it up between the three of us, going back and looking at scope and looking at relationships. So there were three of us. We each took about, 75 terms. It took me an afternoon before we had something that was functional and working, and we could start having conversations about it. In terms of installing the tool, like I said, it took about 10 minutes. I mean, this was just lightning fast, and it's crazy simple to use. It's very user-friendly.
Great. Sharon has written in and is asking, did you mint URIs for all of your terms, and can you talk a little bit more about that process?
Yeah. So the tool lets you set up a URI path. You can say whatever / and then it'll spit out a system ID for each of them, and you can customize that. So I think that basically answers your question. The system will do it for you. We were still having conversations about publishing this to the world, and really which direction we wanted to go with that, whether we expected others to kind of point to our domain, or whether we wanted to just take all of the data and put it somewhere like the Open Metadata Registry, which is the direction that we started heading in terms of having URIs, putting it into a national, international collaborative project like that, and keeping our local instance as something that people could browse and that could enhance our library's web presence.
Okay. Jennifer is asking, what platform would you recommend for a name authority?
I I'm not sure I understand the question. Could Jennifer elaborate?
Okay, Jennifer, we'll wait for you to elaborate and we'll move on to the next question. Annie is asking, does the tool have facilities for batch loading terms and automatic reconciliation with external vocabularies?
Yes, sort of. So you can batch load terms. Like I said, you can just plunk them in. It's just a MySQL database on the back end, so you could also import that way. You can, and we didn't exploit this option, but the tool will do it. You can set up related databases, which would allow you to integrate other vocabularies to maybe what you're working on locally and do exactly what you're asking. So yes, it has that capability.
Okay. Janet is asking, do you use local control vocabularies for all of your metadata projects? And I would be curious to know, are all of the metadata, are all of the projects now sort of being used through this system?
So I'm actually going to encourage you guys to contact Elliot about that question. His email address is on the screen, and I'll get in touch with him after the session. I have recently switched to a new institution, and Elliot has taken over the awesome of using this tool, and he could probably elaborate on what they're doing right now.
Okay, great to know. So Teresa is asking, what impact has making the thesaurus available over the web as linked open data had to this point?
So I think right now we're still talking about potential. We just finished up the pilot project to kind of figure out how we can do this. I would say that in-house, the major impact has been that, other people, whether they're researchers or whether they're other catalogers or archivists, can search across the collections and across the different projects and see what other people are doing. And you just extrapolate that globally, and we imagine that soon enough other institutions can start searching what we've got. So from a researcher point of view, to find out about collections and to find out about topics and foci, or from a cataloger perspective to see how we can reuse vocabularies and increase access because we're all sharing. So measuring impact, yet to be done. That's a future direction. And if anybody else wants to take up a similar idea, I would love to get together and talk about stats and assessment and see how this is really helping us collaborate and how this is helping people gain access to collections.
Great. So Jennifer has written back in. If you remember, Allison, her original question was, what platform would you recommend for a name authority? And she has sort of further elaborated that you can't really use Termitrace, but authority files are a type of controlled vocabulary and are frequently needed for archives at the local level. So any thoughts?
Oh, I see what you're asking. Well, you could use Termitrace. Well, see, this gets back to a much wider discussion of kind of the systems that we have in place and the data models that we have in place. So if you wanted to, you could take the URIs that Termitrace will spit out and use that for control in maybe ArchiveSpace or Archon or your ILS, and just say subject entry URI is this and it points here, without exporting the data that's in Termitrace and putting it in something that we would traditionally call an authority file. I hope I'm making sense. You could do it that way. Or you could do what I just said, which is export it and plunk it into EAC or plunk it into MARC and import it into your system.
Okay. So Jeanette has written in and is asking, how are terms displayed to users? Are they displayed at the catalog or in other discovery interfaces at your library? And as a follow-up, she's curious to know, is there a URL where we can go to browse the terms?
I can send you, yes, I will send you a URL where you can look at how this looks in action. What was the first question? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. The first part was, how are terms displayed to users? Are they displayed in the catalog or in other discovery interfaces at your library?
Right. Okay. So I really like that question because that was like, you know, what now what? What are we going to do with this now that we've got the management system in place? So right now, what we're looking at is another kind of standalone browsing interface, things that we could do and things that you could do. You could take the standalone browsing interface and then make those terms link to perhaps searches in your library catalog, right? So you could use it as like the separate index that's kind of like a portal or a subject guide into specific collections. That's an idea. You can, like I said, export all of the information, put it into MARC, put it into EAC, put it into whatever, import it into your system, and then have extra data there. You could maybe take the subject entry with the URI pointing to your local control vocabulary that you've got in your catalog and then develop something cool that displays, maybe that's with a tooltip, then you can see the contextual information. That's an idea that I was really excited about. Yeah, there's just a lot of potential there, and you're asking that question because you're thinking about all the potential there, and that's great, and I want those ideas. Send me your ideas, and we'll pass them around to everybody because they're endless.
Great. So G is asking, have you thought about using this software to control local person names for faculty or for researchers?
Yeah, definitely. That was one of my own instinctual ideas, is that we're an NACO contributor and we were playing around with EAC, and those two things were happening separately. NACO tied to the library catalog and EAC tied to our archives collections, and all of it is just, resources about persons, right? And then if you start talking about ORCID or any of those researcher identifier projects, all of that's kind of disparate, and you could use a tool like this to bring it together and mesh all of that data and manage it centrally and point out to the different systems. So totally good idea.
And Dawn has a question that's sort of related. She's curious to know, do you think that these local terms should be shared with national authority files?
Yeah. Definitely. I think there's an implicit question there is, well, then why not just do that, right? A couple of reasons. Maybe you're at a really small institution where you don't have the resources or the authority to do that, but you need a solution that works for you on a small scale, and this is it. Secondly, to contribute to the national authority files or to contribute to something like the OMR, like, you got to get your stuff together first. You got to organize it and think about it and then contribute. So this is a space to do that. It can be a publication tool, or it can be kind of like a back-end practice test bed where you're having discussions about organizing your vocabularies.
Okay. Stephanie would like to know, does each main term carry a consistent unique ID? And how does merging and splitting of terms, how are merging and splitting of terms handled in your system?
So the system actually avoids a lot of the hassle that I think you're imagining. When you're entering a new term, you can it'll suggest, like, did you mean this one? So it circumvents a lot of that, like, oops, now I need to merge kind of stuff. But of course, you'll make revisions going forward, and you just you do that, and then it'll generate another URI if you enter another one. Or so the URI remains consistent. So you can change the display of the term. You know, I wanted to change the spelling or what have you. I can just change the preferred label, but the URI remains the same. I hope that answered it.
Great. Well, it looks like we're out of questions currently for Allison. So what we can do is, if others think of questions, we can note those, and if we have time at the end of the overall session, we can go back and ask Allison to answer some of those questions. And just as a friendly reminder, if we do have unanswered questions that we can't get to during the session, we will answer those offline and send them to everyone. Well, thank you, Allison, for that great presentation. And now we're going to move over to Dan to hear her presentation.
Hi, thanks Santi for the transition and introduction. My name is Leon again, and I am the Metadata Services Manager at the George Washington University Libraries. And today I'll be talking about the EAC-CPF standard and some experimentation that a few of my colleagues and I have been doing with it. So my plan for today is to give a bit of an introduction to the standard itself, although in a way the entire presentation is about getting introduced to EAC-CPF. I'll give a few details, a little bit of background information about how and why we decided to start playing with EAC-CPF here at my library. And in connection to that, I'll mention some of the methods and tools that are available for creating and editing records in EAC-CPF. And then finally, I'll discuss some of the ideas we've been tossing around for next things that we want to do now that we have all these records. So what is EAC-CPF? It stands for Encoded Archival Context for Corporate Bodies, Persons, and Families. So if we just look at each of those, each of the component terms in that name a little bit. It's an XML schema. It's an encoding standard for describing what we call agents, whether they're corporate bodies, persons, or families that are associated in some way with archival materials, whether an agent was responsible for the creation or use of those materials, or perhaps might be a subject of the material in question. So essentially, we're talking about an authority standard, but with its focus on names that are relevant to archival materials. The context part of the name has to do with the rich description that you can provide for about an agent using elements that are available to you in the standard. So, like other authority standards, you assert a name form. You can provide dates of existence for the agent you're describing, but you can also provide a lot of other information. There are elements for occupation and function, for example. You can add associated geographic names, and on and on and on. And so one thing that is really important to the people who are developing the standard is that when you use it, you can provide a lot of rich context for the name in question. So if you've been in the archives world for a while, you're probably familiar with some other standards that EAC-CPF is related to. As a content standard, it's based on International Standard Archival Authority Record for Corporate Bodies, Persons, and Families, the 2nd edition. And it's often, although not exclusively, used alongside EAD, Encoded Archival Description. In particular, information about agents can be extracted from encoded finding aids, and that's one way that they can be used together. So if you're looking for more information on the purpose and the development history of EAC-CPF, you can visit this website, and the tag library is there as well. The tag library is there as well if you are interested in browsing what the elements are and how they're used.
Hey, Dan.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. This is Santi. We're getting some feedback that you're a little muffled.
Oh,
so
okay.
Maybe speak a little clearer into the microphone, and whatever you were doing just before I interrupted was actually sounding very nice. So
okay, I'll try to keep doing that.
Do more of that.
Okay. Sorry about that, everybody. Let me continue with, now that I've given you a little bit of background on what it is, I'd just like to highlight a few of its features, and I don't want to get too deeply into XML syntax here or bombard you with a full enumeration of the individual elements that are available in the standard, but I would like to highlight a few things. First, it's very interested in establishing and expressing relationships. So one kind of relationship that you can assert using EAC-CPF is which agents are associated with other agents. So I've just given a fairly simple example here with my two XML snippets. The first snippet just shows that this EAC-CPF record is for someone named Ruth Helm Osborne. And the second snippet is showing that she had some kind of associative relationship with the Colombian women of George Washington University. So that looks fairly simple. The CPF relation element is repeatable, and so you can add as many relationships as you want. And so even though it just looks like a simple element, I think a lot of the power and potential of EAC-CPF is here in its ability to support network building and relationship building. And this is just an example of where it can start. You can reciprocate. The record for Colombian women of George Washington University could have a relation showing that Ruth Helm Osborne was maybe a member or a founder or something like that. And so you can spread out from there. Another kind of relationship that EAC-CPF supports the expression or assertion of is the relationship between agents and resources. So I have given you two more XML snippets. Hopefully nobody is feeling overwhelmed by XML syntax yet. These two snippets are from a record for Peter Force, as you can see from the snippet in the top half. And in the bottom half, that snippet shows how it shows the encoding for two related resources. So the W. Lloyd Wright papers happens to contain some content about Peter Force. So does individual manuscripts, 150 AD to 1998. And I think the other portion of EAC-CPF's power is in this part of it. These two resources happen both to live at my library at GW, but Peter Force was a very prominent figure in DC history, and it's almost a certainty that there will be resources about him held at other DC institutions. So similarly to CPF relation, which links agents to each other, resource relation, this element is repeatable, and so as more resources about him or otherwise associated with him are discovered, we can add those and link them to him, whether they reside here at GW or elsewhere. at another institution. And so EAC-CPF really has the power to not only build personal networks, but to unite resources that are associated with the same agents. All right, I think I'll turn now to the topic of local vocabularies, finally, EAC-CPF. And I particularly want to do this because in our own project and in my own examples, I don't rely very much on local vocabularies, and that's because the established vocabularies that are out there suffice for our needs, but that might not be the case for everybody who's working with EAC-CPF. So,
hey Dan, sorry to interrupt you again.
Sorry,
you're still sounding muffled at times, so maybe try to not move your head if that's what's going on, or stay in a stationary position to cut down on that.
Okay, I'll try that. So even though I personally don't rely too much on local vocabularies for my own project, I don't want to make it sound like what I'm saying isn't generalizable to projects that do need to rely on local vocabularies. So let me just say a few things about that. First, if you create a body of records in EAC-CPF, that can essentially serve as a local authority file. Now, that wouldn't be a management system or anything like that, and it might not be that much better than writing terms down on Post-it notes, but at least if you have an XML record somewhere, it's not going to blow off your desk or get dropped in your coffee or anything like that. So, so as I mentioned before, vocabularies are available out there for most of the descriptive categories in EAC-CPF, and you can use, for example, LCSH for subject headings. You can use it for occupation terms, or you can use geonames for geographic terms. You can use the LC National Name Authority file for geographic terms as well, and for a variety of other types of terms. But in many cases, I imagine that the vocabularies that have been established won't suffice for your needs, and you might want to use a local vocabulary in addition or instead of the ones that I just mentioned or similar ones. So EAC-CPF is flexible enough to accommodate that. There's a vocabulary source attribute available for many elements for you to show where the term in question is coming from. And any of the local vocabularies that end up getting used in the record can just be declared in a control element called local type declaration. So that's simple enough. Another thing I want to mention about local terms and locally determined descriptive categories is that you might want to account for characteristics that are not provided for by any of the official elements in the standard. So there's an element that you can use for that purpose, local description, and I've seen it commonly used for characteristics like gender or nationality of an individual. In our case, as you can see from yet another little snippet there, we use it to place subject terms. But of course, you don't have to limit yourself to gender, nationality, or subject. You could be thinking of some other category that, like gender, nationality, and subject, isn't specifically provided for by the elements that are available. And so, in summary, there's a lot of flexibility for you to go beyond the big vocabularies and to really customize your EAC-CPF records to your own needs. So let me just start talking a little bit about our own project. How did we decide to start experimenting with EAC-CPF? One of the initial sparks, I think, was when a special collections librarian, and a metadata specialist had the opportunity to attend a day-long training about it. But I think there were other cultural, what you might call cultural or environmental factors that made EAC-CPF a good fit for us. First, we're generally open to experimentation. We like testing emerging standards. We like looking at non-MARC ways of organizing data. We're very interested in working with authorities and identities, especially because they're so important in a linked data environment. And finally, and maybe kind of prosaically, we're interested in sharpening our XML and XSLT skills. So EAC-CPF was something that kind of had all of the above. So we thought, well, why not? And so eventually, the two original trainees were joined by an archives and reference specialist and a metadata librarian, that would be myself. And we formed a small working group. And we decided to experiment on the Washingtoniana collection that resides in our Special Collections Research Center for a couple of reasons. Before I get into those, I'll just quickly say that Washingtoniana is, as you can probably imagine from its name, is a collection of both primary and secondary sources on numerous aspects of DC history going all the way back to the 1790s. And we selected it as the first EAC-CPF victim because we expected that it would be a collection that is rich in connections. That is, we thought that many of the agents that appear in it would have associations of some kind with other agents, and also that many of them would be linked to archival resources held by other galleries, libraries, archives, and museums in the area. In other words, we wanted to be able to take full advantage of EAC-CPF's unique relationship building features. Before we jumped into creating records, we took a couple of important steps. First, we solidified some local best practices. So we took a look at the tag library pretty thoroughly. We decided between ourselves which of the optional elements we would consider locally required, how many times we would want them repeated at a minimum or at a maximum. We decided on vocabulary to draw terms from for the descriptive categories, and we decided that we wanted to make our records linked data friendly, so we made it a policy to enter URIs for the terms wherever it was possible to do so, that kind of thing. And finally, there are so many names associated with the Washingtoniana collection that the two members of the working group from Special Collections drew up a list of priority names and reduced some huge number to about 200 priority names. So let me talk about a few of the methods and tools that we encountered as we were playing with EAC-CPF and trying to learn more about it and what other people were doing with it and so on. We actually started out creating records by hand, and I know that sounds awful, and for a couple of reasons it is awful, but it also has its advantages. First, it's a great learning tool, I guess. When you're creating records by hand, you really get to know the standard really, really well. So that was pretty good. At least one person in our working group wanted to learn a lot more about XML, and so that helped with that as well. And it also helped, helped us learn how to get around our respective XML editors, that sort of thing. Another advantage that creating records by hand gave was that we were able to refine our best practices and develop really, really good templates for ourselves. So it was one thing to kind of sit down and in the abstract talk about which elements and attributes and so on we thought were the most important. But once you start making records, you run into various examples or situations that kind of modify your thinking or cause you to think of something else. And so in the beginning, we were evolving our practices and kind of updating our templates as we were going along. But as you can imagine, doing this is not very efficient. A record can take a lot of time and effort. And it's not really something that you want to keep doing if you're looking to create a large number of records. Now, 200 isn't unmanageable by hand, but we really wanted to look into more automated ways of creating records. One thing that helped is that there was a lot of overlap between our EAC-CPF work and other things that we were also working on. For example, we're trying to achieve NACO independence, and it just so happens that some of the names from our priority EAC-CPF list were good candidates for NACO review records. And so whenever that was the case, instead of creating one record for NACO review and then turning around and creating another one from scratch in EAC-CPF, I decided to try writing an XSLT transformation so that someone could just create the record once and then transform into the other one. This works best for records that are pretty full and complete. When you look at a MARC XML authority record and at EAC-CPF, you can see that there are a lot of correspondences between the two. My example snippets here show just two of them. So the 110 tag means that it's a corporate body. That's what the entity type is in EAC. What's in subfield A becomes the content of the part element and so on. But you can also match your dates and your occupations, fields of activity, a biographical or historical summary if you have one, and so on and so on. So that's one kind of transformation that you can do to help save yourself a little bit of effort. Another kind is from EAD to EAC. And actually, there have been some very good efforts by some very good thinkers and programmers out there to write transformations. The Remixing Archival Metadata project that we've started looking at recently. It's abbreviated to RAMP, and it was developed by librarians at the University of Miami Libraries. And I believe my co-presenter, Allison, was one of the principals behind it. So it has a number of very useful functions. It, like I mentioned, it can transform EAD to EAC-CPF. Yeah, it can create records, you can import records, edit records, export records. It can enhance records by ingesting data from WorldCat identities and from VF. And it can also help you publish your agent information to Wikipedia. So that is the link to a demo there in case you're interested. Another one that I want to mention is called Zeek. It's an XForms tool. It was developed by Ethan Gruber at the American Numismatic Society, and it's almost a complete EAC-CPF management system. In addition to having the entry form or an editing interface, you can use it to import VF and DBpedia data so that your records are linked data friendly. And it also comes with a geographic display function, so you can see the locations that are mentioned in your record mapped on something like Google Maps, Google Earth. And there's more information about it on GitHub with the link there. And I just thought I would mention a few other possible tools, although these are not tools that particularly have met our needs, so we haven't really explored them deeply. I believe one of the upcoming iterations of ArchiveSpace has EAC functionalities, although we're not an ArchiveSpace shop, so we haven't really explored that in depth. FileMaker Pro, another possibility. And I always like to keep an eye on GitHub because you never know when something new and cool and useful is going to show up there. There are a number of EAC functionalities that you can get the code for on GitHub. Among other things, there's a script for entering data into Excel and then having that emerge as EAC-CPF. So any of these could be helpful for somebody. So what exactly were we thinking about doing with these, with all these records that we were creating? One of our ambitions is perhaps to develop some kind of portal to locally archived Washingtoniana that would complement. It would be a kind of a name-oriented portal that would complement the collection and content orientation of our encoded finding aids. And it's definitely not going to look like this. This is obviously a rough draft, not ready for prime time, kind of aesthetically unpleasing rough draft. But I just wanted to show what kinds of information would be displayed in an informational page that would be available for every name that we create an EAC-CPF record for. So what I was thinking was that in addition to being able to search such a portal by the agents' names, you would also be able to search occupations, associated places, or subject terms, so that it would be possible to discover other civil rights workers or other people associated with educational change. And although here there's only one associated resource shown and one associated agent, these are what we know about so far. As we discover additional associated resources or agents, we would add them to the underlying EAC-CPF, and that would be reflected in the display as well. So let me just move somewhat quickly through the rest of these slides. This name, Holly Bass, is another of our priority names. And the reason I have this screenshot here is that I wanted to show you what it looks like in the prototype history research tool that has been developed by SNAC, Social Networks in Archival Context, which is a major initiative that is powered, among other things, by EAC-CPF records. And what it does is it's a bank of archival authority records, and it also unites collections that are located in different places but that relate to the same name. And so the name pages that I was thinking, that I had in mind for a portal that we would like to develop is not terribly different. It's not fundamentally different from this kind of name page that you can find on SNAC. The main difference is that our focus would be very, very local. SNAC has millions of records. We would not. And because there was a lot of reliance on machine processes to generate these records, or what you see here just reflects what information those processes were able to glean from say, a bib record for a finding aid in OCLC. And so we would have many fewer names, not anywhere close to the number that is in SNAP, but we would think that we would provide some more tender, loving care for the records that we do have there. So in this case, we might add a photo of Holly, or some more subjects, add some occupations, that sort of thing, to make sure that all the pages for the names that are important to us have rich contextual information. And finally, it's really important to reach out to potential collaborating institutions to fully exploit the connecting power of the resource relation element. So that is definitely essential for us to try to do. We would also like to transform the EAC-CPF that we have and use it in different authority or identity contexts. And one of those contexts is Wikipedia. There's a pretty close relationship, as you can see, between SNAC and Wikipedia, a very natural one. There's a lot in common between a Wikipedia entry and the name pages that you see in SNAC. And I'll just say once again that one of the tools I mentioned before, RAMP, was in fact developed for this purpose. It can help libraries create or expand their presence on Wikipedia. So that's about it for me. I did put up these 3 lessons learned, not so much about EAC-CPF though, just more about our process. I think it was really essential that both metadata and archives and special collections personnel were involved. I think it was helpful to not think of EAC-CPF as something completely brand new, but to look for ways that it is similar to other work that we were doing. And finally, because so many things are developing and changing, it's important to keep up with what's new. SNAC has evolved quite a bit. There are new tools coming out all the time, and even the tag library itself was just finalized last year. I've gathered together some important resources, mostly links to resources that you can find online. And I think I should be able to answer some questions if you have any.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Dan. I'll remind audience members to enter questions into the question chat box, and we will review them as they come in. So, Dan, we currently have a question from John.
Mm-hmm.
What did you use for an editor when you were first starting out learning XML?
Oxygen. Half of us were using Oxygen, the metadata half, and special collections people were using XML Spy.
Okay. Bethany asks, are your records currently viewable? And if so, how, where are they displayed now?
They're not viewable by the public, although that's a really good question, and that's something we definitely need to think about, whether we want to just put them out there for people to reuse or comment on. What would be really ideal is if SNAP could take off and we would just be able to, and I'm thinking kind of utopically here, but and if we could just go into the records that we care about most and kind of merge what we have with what they have there, and you know, end up with the perfect authority record for the names that we care about. But I'm digressing now. The answer is no, not yet.
Great. So Kelly asks, what were your criteria for prioritizing your list of names?
That is a question that I wish one of the special collections librarians could be here to answer. But I'm not sure I can tell you. I would suppose that they picked names of people who had more connections, and this would be based on their knowledge of their archival resources and their knowledge of the names of the agents who were involved. But in general, as I've been working on the records, I've noticed that these people or these corporate bodies, we didn't have that many families, were prominent, and maybe it just has to do with some definition of what of prominence, but they were people who played important roles in the history of DC, or who owned or ran enterprises that were influential or that had a long life, this sort of thing. I never really came across names that were that I couldn't also find a lot of information on Google about or anything like that.
Great. So if folks have additional questions, you can feel free to chat those in. I'm going to ask that Allison be unmuted because there was a question I missed, sorry Allison, that I'm going to jump back to. And at this point we can start a conversation of sorts. So if folks have additional questions for Allison and weren't able to ask those, they can do that at this time as well. So Allison, G wrote in earlier and asked if you were able or you've had any sort of opportunities to reuse some of the zine subject vocabulary you developed for other collections or projects.
Yeah, definitely. So the University of Miami focuses on a lot of sort of countercultural 20th century collections. So a lot of those topics are coming up elsewhere, definitely. They also have, a lot of area studies foci where you get the same thing, something comes up in one project and you're using it in other projects also. Yes, totally. It proved to be really helpful really quickly. After we did this, we had another processing project to go through a collection of Brazilian alternative publications where, the exact same terms were being used to index that collection. So yeah, yes.
All right, thanks so much. This question I believe is for Dan. This is from Rita. So Rita, if you meant this for Allison, you can write in and correct me. But for Dan, where are you keeping your records? Are they in a file, and is it accessible to multiple people?
We're keeping our records in a shared drive that is accessible to multiple people. I would like to explore different servers, so that we can store them better and do more with them. But for the moment, they're just living on a shared drive.
Okay. John has a question for both presenters. For institutions with scarce resources, what advice can either of you offer on getting involved with custom or specialized vocabularies if they are not immediately used? In both presentations, these are not yet available to users, which may be a tough sell for smaller libraries or archives. Thoughts?
So I think that is one of the great things about Team-A-Trace. That's one of the reasons that we went with that product versus some of the other options available, is it gives you that out-of-the-box browsing interface that you can just instantly serve up to users. Like as soon as you put a term in, it's there to use that interface. I would also suggest just researching products and solutions where you understand, and by you I mean whoever's working on your tech services team, understands what's going on the back end. So Team-A-Trace is just PHP and MySQL. It's really simple. So then you can quickly and perhaps personally develop other solutions, and you know how to work with the data, how to get it out, how to transform it. Yeah, just look for solutions that are simpler. Using Team-A-Trace is simple. EAC also is really simple because it's just XML, and I'll let Dan take it from there.
I agree with the starting small and starting simple. I don't have a good sense yet how, if we did get a portal or some kind of interface like that off the ground, how it would be integrated with the material that we already have on on our website. But I think anything that helps connect resources to other resources can help surface the rare materials, and I think it's also really important to talk to people around you. Things are a little bit easier if they're, I mean, hopefully it's not harder when you're working with other libraries or other librarians in your own institution, but in theory it should be easier if you can put your head together with other people who know different aspects of what you're working on.
Another thing to consider is what your goals are. You know, if your goal is to kind of organize your own information and manage your data, then that's one conversation. But if your goal is to give users something that helps them access and understand materials, then whatever you do to control your local vocabularies, even if that is literally in text files that then you like hand to someone, you've done a service, right? So do something and try to make it as managed and centralized and interoperable as possible, right? But do something and then give it to your researchers.
Okay, thank you. Dan, the next question is for you. Linda would like to know, do you know if SNAC creates or uses URIs in any way? And do you anticipate that do you anticipate using EAC files in a linked data environment in the future?
As far as SNAC, I am looking at some source EAC on the website right now, and although I do see URIs, I think you really can't escape URIs, and I would in fact like to consider ways of using EAC in a more kind of linked data aware way. Right now, I think I mentioned that we're putting URIs in our records. It's kind of like we're putting URIs in our bib records too, and it's so far it's just been a way of preparing our data and ourselves for linked data implementation to come. But there isn't really anything happening, anything concrete happening with linked data right now. It's just that the URIs are there so that they're available when we do start trying to link things to or from our records.
The next question is for Allison. Teresa would like to know, can Termatrace import data directly from a spreadsheet? Is there a maximum capacity in terms of the number of terms which the system can handle?
Yes, it can import from a spreadsheet. So if you're not familiar with working with MySQL, it's just gonna look like a table on the back end, and you can plug that in. Maximum capacity is just going to be dependent on your own server or web hosting solution. So whatever you can hold, it can hold.
Okay, so it looks like we're out of questions. I'll give folks about 10 seconds to write in if they have any final questions. All right. Well, that concludes the presentation section of today's session. So thank you, Allison and Dan, for demonstrating techniques for managing local controlled vocabularies. And thank you all to our attendees for joining us. We hope you found today's presentation useful. You will soon receive a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond to the questions and return the form to us. Your comments are very valuable and help the ALCTS Program Committee plan new virtual pre-conferences and webinars in the future. Before we end, I would like to thank a couple of folks. First, we would like to thank our 10 co-sponsors for helping us spread the word on this session and the rest of the sessions in our virtual pre-conference. So thank you very much. Also, I'd like to remind you that there are 5 in-person ALCTS pre-conferences being offered at ALA Annual Conference in San Francisco, if you're planning to attend. Details and registration for these ALCTS pre-conferences can be found on the ALCTS annual webpage, and the address is listed at the bottom of the screen. I would also like to thank the Continuing Education Committee for providing technical support for today's webinar. Their efforts make it possible for us to present these webinars. I'd also like to thank Emily Whitmore from the ALCTS office and members of the ALCTS Program Committee for their help today. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we hope you will participate in other ALCTS webinars and continuing education offerings again in the future.